My wife's best friend destroyed our marriage by manipulating her, but then karma struck and took everything from them both. My wife's closest friend shattered our marriage, and then came the reckoning. The treachery didn't originate from a stranger. It stemmed from the woman my wife considered a sister and a man she barely knew. My name is Ethan, a software engineer who believed he possessed everything: a secure career, a beautiful residence, and a wife I cherished. Lily and I had been united for 6 years. We pursued parenthood, offered mutual support through difficulties, and, so I thought, shared every facet of our lives. Circumstances shifted the moment Lily invited her best friend, Samantha, to reside with us following Samantha's divorce. Initially, I welcomed Samantha. She was part of Lily's inner circle, like family. However, Samantha soon began to erode our connection. She persistently reminded Lily of my perceived emotional absence, my limited emotional connection, and hinted that Lily perhaps merited someone more present. Then arrived Samantha's brother, Alex, recently divorced, financially ruined, and desperate. Samantha introduced Alex to Lily with a singular objective: to marry her and gain access to the inheritance Lily had just received. And it succeeded, until fate intervened. Before everything disintegrated, my existence with Lily felt like a dream. I encountered Lily at a tech art networking event. I, the reserved software engineer, and she, the radiant, paint-stained artist with sparkling eyes and inquiries that stimulated my mind. I never imagined someone like her would grant me her attention, but she did. And somehow, between her studio hours and my coding sprints, we fell in love. Lily wasn't merely beautiful, she was genuinely kind, disarmingly so, and perpetually inquisitive about the world. Her late father, a prominent gallery owner, had bequeathed her a considerable inheritance, yet you'd never discern it from her lifestyle. Lily drove a pre-owned sedan, shopped at thrift stores, and insisted on contributing to rent when we moved in together, until our marriage and the purchase of our home. Our dwelling was modest but bright, with hardwood floors and one bedroom transformed into her art studio. I had a quiet office in the living room's corner, and in the evenings, we'd unwind with wine and music. She favored jazz. I preferred lo-fi beats, so we settled on Miles Davis. In our second year of marriage, Samantha re-entered the picture. Lily and Samantha had been inseparable since college, sharing everything: inside jokes, weekend escapes, childhood adversities, adult complexities. Samantha had been wed to a prosperous real estate developer who ultimately cheated on her, leaving her with only alimony and profound humiliation. When Samantha's divorce was finalized, Lily insisted she move in with us, just for a temporary period. I harbored reservations, of course. Our life was private and sacred, and the addition of a third person felt intrusive. But I loved Lily. If Samantha was suffering and required refuge, how could I refuse? The initial months were manageable. Samantha was courteous, mostly kept to herself, and even assisted with kitchen cleanup without being asked. I began to relax around her, and over time, I came to view her as a younger sister. She jested with me, inquired about my job, and even made Lily laugh more, something I hadn't witnessed in months. Looking back, I realized how meticulously Samantha orchestrated her role. She never overstepped our boundaries, never overtly criticized me. Instead, she posed subtle questions. Does Ethan always work this late? You've been quiet lately, Lily, are you okay? I perceived it as concern. I believed she cared. But more than that, I believed Lily and I were resilient enough to endure anything. We weren't flawless, but we had built something meaningful. We celebrated small victories: her inaugural solo exhibition, my promotion to lead engineer. We grieved together when our first IVF attempt failed, and even though the subject of children caused Lily to withdraw, we consistently found our way back to each other. I was diligently working, striving to build a lasting foundation for us. I accepted extended hours and startup consulting engagements because I wished to grant Lily the freedom to create without financial burden. I never imagined she would interpret my efforts as emotional detachment. In our 5th year of marriage, Lily inherited her father's estate. It wasn't solely money. It encompassed real estate, shares, and an expansive gallery space downtown. I encouraged her to take her time, to determine her desires. I thought we were entering a new phase: greater security, perhaps a second chance at starting a family. I didn't comprehend that Samantha perceived it as the perfect opportunity. The timing, I would later discover, was no coincidence. She moved in just before the inheritance materialized, and she remained, long enough to sow seeds of doubt, long enough to persuade Lily that I was the unsuitable partner, long enough to deliver her vulnerable heart to someone waiting in the wings. There were evenings the three of us would sit in the backyard, sipping wine under string lights. Lily would lean on my shoulder, laughing at Samantha's extravagant dating anecdotes. I recall thinking, perhaps this is what healing looks like: friends, affection, fresh starts. I even remarked to Lily once how proud I was that she had remained so loyal to her friend through everything. If I had known what was coming, I would have paid closer attention. But when you're immersed in something beautiful, it's difficult to conceive of its demise. I was oblivious, not from naivete, but because I truly believed our love was genuine and that everyone under our roof shared the same heart. The alterations were subtle initially, barely perceptible, easily dismissed. Lily began spending more time with Samantha than with me. It wasn't unusual for best friends to connect, especially under the same roof, but now even our dinners felt like intrusions. I'd return home after a long day at work to find them nestled on the couch, giggling over wine, communicating in a language I no longer comprehended. If I joined them, the mood shifted. I'd receive tight smiles, polite nods, and an abrupt change of topic. When I raised the issue, Lily would claim I was imagining things. "You've been so tense lately," she'd say. "Maybe you're just stressed from work." She wasn't wrong about the stress. My firm had just secured a substantial contract, and I was pushing long hours. But I was doing it for us, for her. The more external pressure I faced, the more I hoped she'd find tranquility at home. Yet it seemed the harder I worked, the further she drifted. Samantha offered no assistance. Initially, she stayed in the background, but as the months passed, she began inserting herself into private conversations, challenging my opinions and offering Lily unsolicited counsel on our marriage. "You know," Samantha once remarked, while I was within earshot, "some people think being logical all the time is a virtue, but in relationships, it can be a curse." Lily didn't disagree. She nodded. "Ethan doesn't mean to be cold," she said, "but sometimes it feels like I'm married to a robot." That night, I remained in my office longer than usual, feigning focus on code I wasn't even thinking about. Soon, Lily began criticizing me openly, not in anger, but with quiet, cutting remarks. "You're always tired," she'd say. "You never plan anything romantic anymore." Or, "Samantha says couples who don't prioritize emotional connection end up like roommates." I attempted to counteract it. I organized a weekend trip to the mountains, reserved a cozy cabin, and arranged everything down to the wine and music. But Lily canceled at the last minute, citing an emergency with a gallery client. I later discovered she spent that weekend at a beach house with Samantha and Alex. That was the first time I heard his name. "Alex is Samantha's brother," Lily explained casually when I asked. "He's going through a tough patch. Samantha thought it'd be nice to get him out of the city." I nodded, unsure why I felt a knot in my stomach. Alex began appearing more frequently. He was charming in a way that felt contrived, complimenting Lily's artwork, bringing wine, laughing excessively loudly. I tried to be civil. I had no reason to distrust him, but something about the dynamic made my skin crawl. I expressed my concerns to Lily, telling her I felt as though I was being marginalized from my own life. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply gazed at me and said, "You always think everything's about you." I stopped speaking after that. Over the subsequent weeks, I noticed Samantha and Lily whispering behind closed doors. I wasn't paranoid. I heard my name. The laughter would cease when I entered a room. My presence became a disruption, not a comfort. One night, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Samantha was saying something about timing it correctly and how Ethan's too distracted to notice. Lily didn't argue. She simply said, "I know." I wanted to believe they were discussing something innocent, a surprise party, a gift, anything, but deep down I felt it. I was losing her. Still, I had no proof, just feelings, gut instincts, quiet alarms that no one else seemed to hear. And so, I told myself what so many betrayed people tell themselves. It's probably nothing. It wasn't. I began keeping longer hours at work, not because I had to, but because being home felt like stepping into a cold, invisible fog. The silence between Lily and me was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, pressurized. I missed her even while sitting beside her on the same couch. Sometimes I caught Samantha looking at me, not with anger or even disdain, but with a strange, calculated smirk, as if she knew something I didn't, as if she had already triumphed in a game I didn't realize we were playing. One night, I accidentally opened Lily's sketchbook while tidying the table. Her recent pages weren't of landscapes or abstract forms. They were obsessively drawn portraits of a man who bore no resemblance to me. I didn't inquire who it was. I didn't need to. Something sacred was unraveling in the quietest, most precise way possible, and I was beginning to discern the loosening threads. The truth didn't hit me all at once. It crept in quietly, sinisterly, until it was impossible to ignore. It began with a notification on Lily's iPad. She had left it charging on the kitchen counter, screen faintly glowing as I passed by. I wasn't deliberately snooping. I hadn't become that type of husband. But when I saw Alex's name in a message preview at 2:14 a.m., I froze. The text was simple. Tonight was perfect. I wish we didn't have to hide anymore. I stared at the words, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the room around me. My mouth went dry, my hands trembled. No, it couldn't be. I opened the conversation, my fingers numb. Dozens of messages filled the screen. Flirtatious, intimate, secretive. You look stunning in that red dress. He doesn't suspect anything. I can't wait until it's just us. I couldn't breathe. Alex, Samantha's brother. The man I had welcomed into my home, poured wine for, and listened to talk about his failed businesses and messy divorce. The man Lily claimed was merely going through a rough patch.
How long?
How long had they been deceiving me? I sat on the floor, the iPad glowing in my lap. I didn't cry, not yet. My brain refused to accept it. There had to be some explanation. Perhaps it was innocent. Perhaps, God, perhaps this was all Samantha's doing. The thought gave me just enough strength to delve deeper. I opened Lily's email account. She had given me her password years ago, and I never stopped remembering it. What I discovered there wasn't just a love affair. It was a blueprint. A series of emails between Lily and Samantha, some brief, some lengthy, all saturated with subtle manipulation. Samantha always framed her advice as a loving concern. You deserve someone who sees your soul. Ethan's a good man, but maybe not the right man. Alex understands artists in a way Ethan never will. One message chilled me to the bone. Samantha, he won't fight back. Ethan's too passive, too focused on work. If you're going to do this, do it now, before he finds out. Then another, sent to Alex. Samantha, Lily trusts you. Don't push too hard, just be there. Let her come to you. She needs to feel like it's her choice. I realized with growing horror that Lily wasn't simply having an affair. She had been manipulated. She was the pawn, the prize, the jackpot. Lily's inheritance had arrived months earlier. Property, stocks, liquid cash. I hadn't given it much thought. I had always trusted her to manage her finances. We had separate accounts, mutual respect, and no secrets, or so I believed. Now it all made sense. Why Samantha had encouraged Lily to consult a new financial advisor, why Alex had been so curious about Lily's gallery, why they both suddenly had opinions about wills and real estate taxes. They weren't just emotionally seducing her, they were financially encircling her. But here's the cruel irony. I don't believe Lily truly knew, not the complete picture. Yes, she was cheating. Yes, she lied to me. But her messages to Samantha were riddled with confusion, guilt, and doubt. She kept asking, "Are you sure this is the right thing? And what if Ethan gets hurt?" She didn't sound like a mastermind. She sounded like someone unaware she was being used. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her and demand how she could betray me, how she could betray herself. But I did none of that. I closed the iPad, packed a small bag, and left. That night, I slept in my car, parked in the lot of a closed bookstore. I stared at the ceiling, heart hollow, mind spinning. In the morning, I returned home. Lily was in the kitchen, barefoot, making coffee. She smiled when she saw me, as if nothing had changed, as if we were still us. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked. I looked at her for a long time. I wanted to say everything, to hurl her iPad onto the counter, show her the messages, the emails, the manipulation. But something stopped me. Perhaps it was the way her eyes looked tired. Perhaps it was the way her hands trembled slightly as she stirred the coffee. Or perhaps it was because deep down, I knew she had no idea she was being exploited. I said nothing. Instead, I asked her a question I never thought I'd ask. "Are you happy?" She froze. The spoon clinked against the mug. "What?" "I mean it," I said calmly. "Are you happy with me, with this life?" She looked at me and then slowly she said, "I don't know." And that was it. The end didn't arrive with a quarrel or a shout. It arrived with that quiet confession. I moved out 2 days later.
She didn't ask me to stay.
Looking back, I realized that betrayal doesn't always stem from malice. Sometimes it arises from weakness, from being too easily swayed by people who feign concern. And Lily, for all her imperfections, had been surrounded by vipers. I just never perceived the bite until it was too late. A week after I departed, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter from Lily. It was brief, apologetic, but vague. She didn't mention Alex, didn't mention Samantha. She only said she hoped I was okay, that she missed our quiet mornings, and that she was trying to find herself. I didn't reply. I kept that letter in my drawer for months, not because I clung to hope, but because a part of me still required proof that what we had was once real, even if everything thereafter was a lie. And every time I opened that drawer, I was reminded of one brutal truth. I wasn't just betrayed by my wife. I was sacrificed, and Lily didn't even know who handed her the knife. Losing Lily was one thing. Losing everything else along with her nearly destroyed me. I didn't contest the divorce. I couldn't. By the time she asked me to leave, I was already emotionally detached. She didn't scream or cry or plead for anything. She simply said, I don't feel anything for us anymore, as if 6 years of shared life could be condensed into a single numb sentence. I packed my belongings in silence. No accusations, no explanations, just the quiet ache of someone being erased. I moved into a tiny studio apartment on the outskirts of town. Inexpensive, drab, forgettable, the kind of place you don't adorn because you're unsure if you'll remain there long enough to matter. I barely ate. I barely slept. I worked just enough to keep the lights on, and then I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering how it had all disintegrated so perfectly, so cleanly. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was hostile. Days blurred into nights. I stopped checking my phone. I deleted social media. Every notification felt like a trigger. Every photo of Lily, even old ones on my cloud drive, felt like salt in an unhealing wound. But nothing stung as much as the betrayal from Samantha. I kept contemplating. How long had she been orchestrating this? Was it from the very beginning? Was moving in with us merely part of a larger scheme? Had I been that gullible? The worst part was, I still had no one to confide in. I didn't want to be the person who said, "My wife left me for her best friend's brother, and they took her inheritance with them." It sounded like a melodrama. People wouldn't believe me. Hell, I barely believed myself. One afternoon, while sifting through old folders on my computer, I stumbled upon a document Lily had asked me to sign months earlier. It was a dense legal form, something she said was just a joint agreement for easier estate planning. I hadn't read it carefully. I was busy. I trusted her. My chest tightened as I scrolled through it now. Among the jargon and passive legalese was a clause, something about asset realignment in case of divorce, a section that effectively transferred half of the house's value and a portion of our joint savings into her name permanently. My signature was at the bottom. I stared at it for a long time, ball rising in my throat. This wasn't just emotional loss. This was calculated, engineered. I had been too trusting, too focused on work, too willing to assume love was sufficient to shield me from manipulation. And now, I had nothing to show for it but a couch that smelled of mildew and a kitchen with flickering fluorescent lights. I attempted to distract myself, watched movies, played games, read books, but everything felt hollow, as if I were drifting through someone else's life, wearing someone else's skin. I went to therapy once. I sat on a couch opposite a woman who gently asked me, "What do you want to talk about?" I couldn't answer. I just shook my head and left after 10 minutes. The world didn't halt for my heartbreak. Bills still arrived, projects still had deadlines. I still had to appear, smile in meetings, pretend like I hadn't been hollowed out from within. Some nights, I'd walk for hours through unfamiliar neighborhoods, past families eating dinner, lights glowing warmly through windows. I envied them, not for the stability, but for the illusion, the belief that their walls couldn't crumble like mine had. One night, I found myself standing on a pedestrian bridge, gazing down at traffic. The city buzzed below, indifferent. I gripped the rail, just stood there, no plan, no drama, just numb. That terrified me, not because I wanted to jump, but because for a moment, I couldn't conceive of a single reason why I shouldn't. The next morning, I called in sick, not to rest, but because I knew if I didn't stop and confront what was happening, I wouldn't survive it. I took the day to review everything, emails, bank records, memories. I allowed myself to feel it all. The humiliation, the foolishness, the fury, the grief. And when the sun set, I sat on the edge of my mattress and whispered aloud, "I need help." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't noble, it was simply honest. And for the first time in weeks, I slept. That sleep wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, filled with fragmented images and nascent thoughts, but it was real. And when I awoke the next morning, something had shifted. Not clarity, not strength, but perhaps a beginning, a thread to grasp. I didn't know how to mend my life, but I finally accepted that it required mending, and that somehow was the initial step. Recovery didn't arrive with a sunrise or a sudden revelation. It came gradually, like melting ice, like learning to breathe again after nearly drowning. I started small, waking before noon, making my bed, eating something other than instant noodles. I compelled myself to walk in the nearby park, to sit on a bench, and simply exist among people. At first, it felt alien, like pretending to be a person I no longer recognized, but habits, even artificial ones, eventually take root. That's when Noah appeared. He was an old college friend, one of the few who hadn't drifted away after graduation. We lost touch after he relocated to the West Coast, founded a company, and achieved great success. He was visiting town for a startup convention when he texted me out of the blue. "Still breathing, or should I send a rescue dog?" I met him at a coffee shop near my apartment. I hadn't seen him in almost 8 years, but he looked the same, relaxed, slightly chaotic, full of ideas. He took one look at me and said, "Jesus, Ethan, you look like a man who fought a war and lost." I laughed for the first time in months. We talked for hours. I didn't elaborate, just stated my marriage had ended, that I was figuring things out. Noah didn't press. He simply listened, nodded, and then changed the subject. Ever think about finally building that analytics platform you used to rant about back in college? I blinked. I hadn't considered that in years. It's a saturated market now, I mumbled. So, he countered. You always said you weren't interested in market share. You wanted to build something smart, something clean, something that worked. I shrugged, but something within me stirred, a muscle I hadn't flexed in a long time. The next day, Noah sent me a laptop. No message, just a box with a note taped to the screen. No excuses. So I began not with a business plan, not with funding, just with code. I wrote for hours, clean, elegant lines. The logic soothed me. In a world that no longer made emotional sense, logic was my sanctuary. Slowly, an idea formed, then a prototype, then a pitch deck. Noah introduced me to a few individuals, discreetly, without fanfare. He never divulged my past, never portrayed me as broken. He simply said, "This is Ethan. He builds good stuff." I accepted every opportunity, freelance contracts, early demonstrations, critical feedback. I channeled my pain into progress. I didn't discuss Lily or Samantha or Alex. I allowed the silence to do what it does best, protect and fortify. It took 9 months, but I launched the beta. Within 3 weeks, we had a dozen pilot clients, then 20, then 50. I slept 3 hours a night, subsisted on black coffee, and responded to emails at 3 a.m., but I felt alive.
Not healed. Not yet, but alive.
People started noticing. Old colleagues reached out. My landlord inquired if I was the same Ethan he had read about in a tech blog. I simply smiled and said, "Depends who's asking." I still didn't post on social media, didn't explain, didn't correct the assumptions circulating about my disappearance, why Lily and I had separated, and what had transpired with her inheritance. I allowed the rumors to fade in the shadow of my accomplishments, because sometimes silence is more potent than any explanation. I saw Lily once, briefly. She was emerging from a downtown cafe, with Alex. They didn't see me, but I saw them. Lily appeared different, not shattered, not content, just distant, like someone merely going through the motions in a life they hadn't chosen but didn't know how to abandon. I felt neither rage nor sorrow, just attachment, like observing an old film you once adored, now faded and quiet. I turned and walked away. That night, I worked until dawn, and when the sun streamed through my apartment window, I realized something had shifted. I was no longer pursuing success to prove something. I was building something because I could, because I wanted to, and because, for the first time in a long time, I believed I deserved it. One morning, as I sat with my coffee and laptop open, coding while the city slowly awakened, I realized I no longer needed to flee from my past. I had simply outgrown it. I didn't require vengeance. I didn't require closure. What I needed, what I possessed, was peace. And that, finally, was enough. The invitation arrived in a crisp, weighty envelope, an International Tech and Art Convergence Summit in San Francisco. Initially, I almost discarded it. I wasn't a public speaker, and I wasn't eager to stand before cameras again. But then I saw the name of the sponsoring organization, the Arcadia Foundation for Innovation in Art and Technology. Lily's father had been one of its founding patrons. That's when I knew. I accepted. The summit was held in a glass-domed convention center, surrounded by sculptures and digital installations. Tech founders, investors, curators, and artists filled the space. It was a strange convergence of my past and present lives, the world I had once shared with Lily and the one I had constructed after her. Noah greeted me backstage. "Ready for this?" I smiled. "I'm not here to impress. I'm here to close." He nodded, handing me a tablet. "The contract's preloaded. Sign after your talk. We've got a 7-figure offer on the table from the Berlin group. They want full integration and exclusive rights in Europe." I took a deep breath and stepped into the spotlight. The room grew quiet. I didn't use a script. I spoke plainly about simplicity in design, about emotion and data, about rebuilding systems and lives with precision and clarity. It wasn't merely a pitch. It was a declaration. The applause when I finished was generous, heartfelt. But it was what transpired afterward that I will never forget. As I descended from the stage, I saw her, Lily. She stood near the back of the hall, wearing a faded navy blazer and clutching a frayed leather bag. Beside her stood Alex, eyes sunken, suit ill-fitting, and Samantha, lips tight, jaw clenched, no longer the confident manipulator I remembered. They hadn't seen me yet. They were there for the same reason I once would have been. To network, to solicit funding, to find a lifeline. I walked toward them slowly, allowing the moment to unfold. When Lily saw me, her mouth opened slightly. She looked older, not just tired, but depleted, like someone who had sprinted toward a dream and collided with a concrete wall. "Ethan," she whispered. Samantha stiffened. Alex glanced down at the floor. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even smile. "Thank you," I said calmly, "for pushing me out of the mud." None of them responded. There was nothing to say. Noah appeared beside me, nodding. Suddenly, I opened the tablet, tapped twice, and signed the deal, a 7-figure agreement, right in front of him. Lily blinked rapidly, but her face remained composed. Samantha looked away. Alex muttered something under his breath. I turned to depart, but then I paused. "You once told me I didn't understand art," I said quietly, looking at Lily. "Maybe, but I understand design. And this was the cleanest architecture of all. Built from ruins." Then I walked away. Later that evening, a journalist approached me for an interview. He had heard whispers about my resurgence, my past, my silence. He asked, "Do you ever regret what happened, the way it all collapsed before this?" I considered it. "No," I said. "Some things have to break, so better things can be built." He smiled. "That's a quote." "No," I said again. "That's experience." I didn't see Lily, Samantha, or Alex again that night, but words spread quickly. People spoke, not about scandal, but about a man who had vanished, reappeared, and rewritten the rules without needing to shout. And the contract I signed that day was just the beginning. My company's valuation tripled within 6 months. We opened an R&D center in Europe. I was invited to judge design festivals, deliver guest lectures at universities, and even mentor young founders. But none of that tasted as sweet as the silence I maintained. I never told the world my version of the story, never dragged Lily's name through the mud, never exposed Samantha or Alex for the opportunists they were, because the most profound vindication isn't revenge. It's about constructing something so formidable, so undeniable, that no one could ever again misjudge your worth, not even the people who attempted to bury it. I later learned from a mutual contact that after the summit, Lily had tried to approach several investors, but doors that were once open for her, because of her father's name, were now closed. People remembered the inheritance, the failed gallery revival, and the public fallout. No one wanted to back a name lacking direction and integrity. Samantha, once celebrated in artistic circles, was quietly blacklisted. Her influence had evaporated, and with it her relevance. Alex had squandered what little he gained from Lily's assets and now spent his days peddling low-tier crypto schemes and complaining about cancel culture. I never looked back. I didn't need to, because some consequences don't require a courtroom or confession, just a spotlight and the patience to await your moment under it. The truth has a way of emerging slowly, then all at once. It started with a whistleblower, someone from the small legal firm that handled Lily's inheritance, who filed a quiet complaint flagging suspicious activity tied to Alex and Samantha. The complaint landed in the inbox of a local financial investigator, and what unfolded next was a fabric of deception. It turned out the advisor Samantha had introduced to Lily was a facade, a shell company created by a friend of Alex's, designed to discreetly siphon funds into high-risk ventures that, predictably, failed quickly and disastrously. Within months, most of Lily's inheritance was gone. The gallery she had once dreamed of revitalizing was sold to cover debts. A downtown condo she'd purchased as a creative studio was repossessed. The art trust her father had established for her future was liquidated. Lily attempted to confront Samantha, but by then Samantha had disappeared, off the grid, unreachable, reportedly hiding somewhere in Nevada under a false LLC and a different last name. Alex didn't hide, he couldn't. He was brought to court after failing to repay multiple loans co-signed with Lily's assets. His smug confidence collapsed under questioning. Records showed transfers, false invoices, and documents bearing Lily's forged signature. But the most damning evidence came from Lily herself. In a moment of breakdown, she provided her private messages and emails, revealing the depth of Samantha's manipulation. The tone of Lily's voice in those messages broke the hearts of even seasoned legal staff, hopeful, trusting, naive. She wasn't just betrayed. She was groomed, exploited. The court didn't press criminal charges. Lily refused. But multiple civil suits were filed against both Samantha and Alex. Samantha's standing in the art world was ruined. No gallery would work with her, no investor would listen. Her name, once whispered with admiration, became synonymous with deceit. Alex faced bankruptcy, asset seizure, and public humiliation. Every business attempt he made afterward was tainted by association. He tried to pivot to coaching, then crypto, then men's empowerment. None of it stuck. And Lily? She vanished from public life, no interviews, no blog posts. She retreated to a small town upstate and began teaching art at a community center. People who saw her said she looked thinner, quieter, like someone still seeking herself. We never spoke again. But one day, a letter arrived at my office, with no return address. Inside was a single note. I was wrong. I see it now. I'm sorry. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a signature. I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder that trust is fragile, that love must be safeguarded, and that sometimes the people closest to us wield the sharpest blades. I didn't rejoice in their downfall. I didn't need to. Their ruin wasn't mine to orchestrate. It was the natural conclusion of something built on falsehoods. And me? I continued building, quietly, steadily, surrounded by people who earned their place in my life, because the greatest justice isn't vengeance. It's living in a world they can no longer access. In time, I heard from mutual acquaintances that Lily had resumed painting, mostly small landscapes. Someone said she donated half her proceeds to women's shelters. Another said she never discussed the past, not even when directly asked. A part of me wanted to believe that meant she was healing, that even in the devastation Samantha and Alex left behind, Lily had found a sliver of peace. But that wasn't my story to narrate anymore. Mine had progressed, and as the world continued, so did I, with purpose, with quiet dignity, and without ever needing to utter, "I told you so." If you had told me years ago that I'd one day stand on a stage, operate a company, and experience peace in solitude, I wouldn't have believed you. Back then, I thought love was enough, that good intentions could sustain a marriage, that kindness would shield me from betrayal. I was mistaken. And the people who wound you the most aren't always adversaries. Sometimes they are the ones you allow close.